This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. G'day everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. I'm Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to take you on this journey of basket casey goodness again. Joining me back again is Steve Connolly. Welcome, Steve.
As always, it's my pleasure to be taken on the journey. Thank you for having me once again.
Is it really always a pleasure to be taken on this basket casey journey?
Well, most of the time, yes. When you let me get on my soapbox and rant. Thank you for doing the fill-in episode when I was moving house in anticipation of Cyclone Alfred, which for some of us led to more impacts than others.
Yep.
And I know that some clubs with which we work, as well as many others.
Some of them are still underwater.
Yeah.
And it's funny where this one, well, weather is unpredictable and chaotic.
Cyclones even more so.
As it turns out, like literally we're watching it coming in, and being prepared, and we were, I don't know about you, but we had all of our outdoor furniture inside from Thursday. It hit.
Ours was in a truck.
Quite literally at 11 o'clock on Friday night. So you were fine. But like we're watching it as it's coming in and it's going and doing these loop-de-loop things out in the ocean and going really slow, and then as it kind of hit, it kind of went, well,
and
then like you guys were in the middle of it and there was bad weather to the north and bad weather to the south, but
really
you're
weird.
like swimming and
we could have been.
On the beach.
If we weren't moving house, we would have been doing all of the above. But it is a really good reminder of the importance of business continuity and disaster resilience planning. And at times like this, when our memory is, or events like this, disasters are fresh in our memory, it's a good opportunity that we always take to remind people that doing your planning in peacetime and buying your generators and having your,
Getting your toilet paper? Make sure you got toilet paper. What is with that? I was thinking, is everyone like going and buying all of the toilet paper because they literally want to wrap themselves up like mummies? So that
I always laugh about the COVID experience of toilet paper and say, if I don't have toilet paper, I'll get by. I'm gonna find a way to take care
Clean
of
up
that.
down there.
Yeah, but give me food. I'll take it.
Did I tell you about the bloke? I was sitting at tennis one day and a bloke said, I figured out why all the toilet paper's gone. I said, really? Tell me. He says, yeah, this is COVID. One person sneezes, 100 people shit themselves.
That's good. That's very
kind
good.
of played out that way too, didn't it? But we make toilet paper here. So supply chain disruptions was Anyway, but I said in the episode the shops had done a good job, and I think that they did do a good job until about 17 minutes after I finished recording. And to their credit, they ran out of stuff. And those that didn't have power and didn't have backup generators and didn't have stock didn't open. And
those that were, extra conscious of their staff, and this applies in clubland as well. Because I know that, there was training sessions scheduled that got cancelled, and we ourselves with our office made the call, you made the call that we would shut for a couple of days last week.
That turned out to be beautiful weather.
But you'd always rather it be that way than the other way.
Yep. It's like when I pack too much stuff in my computer bag. I'd rather have that extra adapter in the front pocket of my computer bag and not need it than the other way around. Anyway, let's get back to our discussion about constitutions.
Can we say back on track if we haven't yet?
Back on track. Let's get on track. Yeah. So today I want to talk about that part of a constitution that isn't there. And it's what do you do in a case when there's something that comes up and the constitution's silent? And this, it's so frustrating when this happens, especially when you're seeing, and I don't know about you, but you're seeing constitutions, all of the stuff, lots and lots of stuff that doesn't really need to be there, like really detailed job descriptions for the canteen convener in a constitution. The colours of the sorts of clothes that we're going to wear. Literally in the old days, the length of the shorts or skirts that the players would need to wear. All in the constitution, yet you go there to resolve some dispute and there's nothing there about dispute resolution. Or you get to the AGM and somebody says, well, I've turned up and I've got 17 proxies. And then somebody says, well, do we allow proxy voting? And you're flicking through the constitution saying, there's nothing in here about that. And what does that mean? What does it mean if there's nothing in there? Does it mean that, no, we don't allow proxy voting? Or in some cases, does something else apply?
And just quickly, a bit of a precursor to this conversation, and this is interesting because we often, always I should say, when we're talking constitutions with clients of ours that we're working with on updating their documents, their governance documents, we say you want to ensure that your document has the stuff that should be set in stone in there so that it's not easy for a management committee or board to change on a whim. But you should strive to include a reasonable amount of flexibility in your constitution so that you can adapt to the changing realities of your operating environment over time. But that can't be at the expense of that ambiguity at a general meeting. When you really need certainty to say to that person with 17 proxies, either A, we don't allow proxies and here is the section of our constitution that says that, or B, yeah, we allow proxies, but the meeting's open and you didn't give them to the secretary.
Because here are the rules.
That's
for
right.
Proxies, because it's important enough for that sort of stuff to be in the constitution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's important to just point out that this might sound somewhat contradictory to what, the message that we always tout, but it's a matter of striking that balance and having the stuff in there that really needs to be in there so that you're avoiding ambiguity. And obviously, depending on how a club is established as a legal entity, there are certain requirements for incorporated associations or for companies, things that have got to be in their constitution. So that, to some extent, makes it a little easier to include the things that have got to be in there, because if you try and get a document registered that doesn't have that shit in it, it's going to get knocked back, or it should get knocked back. So I think it's important just to acknowledge that we still subscribe to that belief. You want to have the right amount of flexibility to enable your organisation to operate both today and in the future in the way that it wants to operate.
So it's a balance between flexibility and clarity.
Yep.
But it's also a balance between brevity and clarity.
Yeah.
Because sometimes...
Really good
and
point.
Look, and to my point about the stuff that's there that doesn't need to be there, and look, it's not to say that that stuff's not important, it's just not constitutionally important, which means that it takes a special resolution of members to change it.
Yeah.
That's the sort of thing that should be able to be fluid enough that operating circumstances change. Look, the length of shorts and skirts, times change, uniforms change. So do we really need that to be fixed so that we've then got to go back to our members and say, is it okay if we change the length of our shorts and skirts?
Or more likely what happens is the length changes and no one picks up that the Constitution says something different.
Yeah, until you get a Grumpy George or a Grumpy Georgina that says, well, it's wrong and you're acting outside them. Seriously. But it happens.
Yeah.
So the brevity and clarity thing is important because you want there to be enough in there that it gives you the clarity that somebody's going to want when they're going looking at the Constitution for an answer.
Yep.
You want them to be able to get the answer clearly without getting what I call bloat.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you let things go, and the lists of objects in a constitution can be like that as well. When somebody's trying to be all-inclusive and they end up putting so much in that they miss a few things
Leave
out.
stuff out. Powers are the same.
Yeah.
Powers, you can rattle off all the things that an organisation can do, or you can simply say it's got the powers of an individual.
Or the powers of a company under the Corporations Act. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what do you do if something's not there? And
call CPR group.
Okay. Well done. What do we call that? A subtle plug?
Yeah, unsubtle.
Yeah. So, let's take the proxy example, because that's a good one to start with, and then we might take one that's a bit less clear cut. Mm-hmm. So with the proxy example, in the case, and let's say, we'll stick in Queensland, let's say there's just nothing about proxies in a constitution. It's like that section, and you might have even seen this, that section where the numbering of a constitution goes from 39 to 42.
Yeah.
Because there's, what happened to 40 and 41? Yeah. They've literally just been cut out and not even renumbered.
Yep.
So if proxy voting is not there, then what happens? Who gets to make a call?
Well, I suppose in a very consultant-like manner, I'm going to give you an answer, which is that it depends.
Nice, well done.
So
you sound like my lawyer.
If the Constitution has a provision in it that the model rules are expressly displaced by that club's constitution, then the model rules cannot be deemed to apply in this instance. If the Constitution does not have that provision, then it can be deemed that the model rules apply, and indeed the model rules provide for proxies and are pretty loose in their kind of constraints around those. But I suppose the important overarching answer is that the management committee has the authority, and most constitutions should have this very clearly worded in there, that the management committee has the authority to interpret the constitution on any matter on which the constitution is silent, but that interpretation must have regard to the act. Because the act is ultimately the kind of boss document, if we can use simple plain English. The boss document. I like that, actually. It's the boss document.
It's the boss.
It's the boss document. Yeah. So it, and also if there is any matter which, and this is not common, but we do see it, that there'll be, and this is often the result of changes to the legislation, that there'll be some matter that, and it won't be the length of skirt, because that's something that's so detailed that the Act will not deal with that. No legislation under which an organisation is established should deal with the length of skirts in which people, male, female or other, are allowed to participate in any sport or activity. But if it is a matter that the Act does provide for, and your constitution says something different, then the Act prevails in the event of that inconsistency. But again, how does that shit get dealt with? How does that get sorted out? Because you've got a grumpy George, someone who's touting themselves as the expert. You've got a group of people on the management committee who are just trying to do the right thing. And that's why you need to call CPR Group.
Yeah, gee, there's so many places we can go from here. I'm going to start with... Let's actually play this out. So we're in this AGM.
Someone turns up with 17 proxies.
Old mate's holding 17 proxies.
Yep.
And he has, let's say that he has provided them to the secretary before the meeting, and that's when the secretary's gone, well,
don't know
what do I do with these? This is the first time this has happened.
And what does the Constitution say in this case? It's silent?
Nothing, and there's no clause that displaces the model rules or the template constitution.
Okay, yep.
What happens here? Actually, let me foreshadow that, because what happens next...
And what should happen next are two different things.
Okay, and so what happens next? Let's play it out depending on who's in the room and what those people know.
Yeah, okay.
So let's just go with...
Everyone knows nothing?
Everyone kind of knows nothing. What do they do in this point?
They probably permit the proxies to be exercised during the meeting.
Okay, now...
And that we know has definitely happened. Things go wrong during meetings that someone identifies as wrong after the meeting.
Okay, that's what, these tendrils
that's
of where
it.
we can
and
go.
We'll go
that's
there.
another one. That's another one.
And that happens. That happens quite a bit, because in the heat of a meeting, when there's a bit of angst already and discomfort in the room, people, in my experience, are more inclined to shy away from the conflict and just allow, if someone seems like the expert, especially if Barry, was it Barry? Whatever his name is, George.
Grumpy George.
If he's been a member for a long time, and to our last chat, if he's a life member, then there might be a little less confidence in people to call out whether he's right or not, and able to exercise those proxies. So in my experience, if there's a lot of people in the room, none of whom have got any bloody idea, then the proxies are probably going to be able to be exercised.
Okay, and in this case, is that right or wrong?
In this case, it's wrong. But however, if it's not picked up...
Why is it wrong?
Because the... Sorry, you're right.
I haven't said anything yet.
Sorry, no, but you're right to challenge my answer.
But I'm
always right.
Just ask my wife.
So, no one knows anything. The Constitution is silent on whether the model rules are displaced. Therefore, the model rules could be deemed to apply, and the model rules would permit the 17 proxies to be exercised.
So that is all reasonable?
Yep, it is.
All right, let's continue this one and then backtrack. So this choose your own adventure style.
And the same thing would be true, sorry, just quickly to jump in. If there was someone in the room who knew what we were just talking about, that if the model rules are silent, then the model rules relating to that matter can be deemed to apply.
Because they may have at least read that bit up on top of the Constitution.
Yep.
It says if there's any inconsistency, the model rules or the Act
so the
is
right
going to
thing
apply.
In that scenario could ideally happen whether people in the room know what to do or not.
This is obviously a good topic, because if you watch this in fast motion, you'll probably see us both screaming going, wow. So if this, choose your own adventure is a good one, because if this happens, we follow this path.
Yeah.
Meeting now closed, so 17 proxies exercised, votes go however they go.
Grumpy George probably gets his way, let's face it.
Maybe not,
too many more people in the meeting at most. Unless if it was a contentious meeting, in which case he might not be the only one who turned up with 17 proxies.
Yes, because he's probably got all of his friends and family to also turn up with proxies. Now, again, we go back to whether they're members and have voting rights or not, and we'll see. Okay, decisions made, meeting now closed, and now somebody goes, hang on a minute, we shouldn't have allowed those proxies. Now, notwithstanding that we've just worked through and it's okay, what happens to that person who now challenges a decision? The meeting's closed, the call was made by the management committee, as is right. And there will also be that clause in the Constitution that says if the Constitution's silent on something, now these guys probably don't have a copy of the Constitution sitting there with them anyway. So whether they do or they don't, they've said, oh, well, he's yelling, so he must be right, so they've permitted it. We've now discussed that that's in this case okay and makes sense. But now somebody's challenged it after the fact. What recourse do they have?
Well, realistically, in many cases, very little, because if an irregularity, if something went wrong during a meeting and it wasn't picked up during the meeting, then the decision stands. And
this is a decision of the organisation, and this is, we're talking
at the highest level, the general membership voting.
So these are member-driven organisations, which means that we elect our decision-making body, the board or the management committee or the executive, whatever they're called under the Constitution. So our management committee in this case has been elected to lead, they've led, but big decisions always have to fall back to members in these organisations. So it is this is the level where the members are there. They've followed, the management committee has followed the process in the Constitution. Now, whether they had a copy of it open in front of them and went, okay, so Act takes precedence and we get to do the interpretation, or they've just done it on gut feel, which is probably more the case because of Grumpy George's yelling. They've got to the end of the meeting. Where do you go? So now they can say, well, we want to reopen it, but to standard meeting procedures, you go, well, an irregularity in the standing orders of a meeting that was not picked up until after the irregularity occurred, and indeed after the meeting, it's like, well, you had your chance to challenge it at the time, you didn't, every member did, and no member did challenge it, so there's nothing that you can do at the moment to now go back and backtrack and do that anymore.
There's also the consideration of what if the Constitution said that proxies are not allowed, and this same scenario played out the way that we've just talked through, and similarly after the meeting someone says, hey, the Constitution says that we can't do this, realistically the same answer applies. Now again, there's always and it depends, because if someone had have tried to raise their concern during the meeting and that was squashed by Grumpy George or the chairperson, or so there's still that element of it depends. Hey, I tried to address this irregularity and I was shut down. Nevertheless, under ordinary circumstances, the answer would remain the same, that the decision was made, and we've even been looped in after the fact. I'm probably confident that you remember the organisation in the world of cricket that I'm referring to, where the shit hit the fan and we were contacted after the fact to say, hey, these people were allowed to vote and they shouldn't have been allowed to vote for this reason or that, and that in itself was disputed by a range of different people on either sides of the argument. But we advised, look, it wasn't picked up during the meeting, so notwithstanding the fact that there might be some water in the argument that shouldn't have been allowed to happen, it wasn't picked up, so decision stands. If there's then a rescindment motion presented to a subsequent meeting, that's another matter. And
which is fine, and that can happen.
Indeed.
But it's not the only recourse. So let's say that it was more than an irregularity in standing orders, and that they allowed proxies and shouldn't have. Now, what they could try... Now, the members who are raising this issue after the fact can try and escalate it. But where do we escalate it to? So in sport, they're going to escalate it to... If it's cricket, they're going to escalate it to the regional association. If it's not a regional association, to the state or to the national body. Cricket Australia doesn't care.
No.
They're just going to say, dude, this is not our remit. We're not going to get involved in this. Okay, then they go, well, let's go the incorporation route and let's take it to our Department of Consumer Affairs or Office of Fair Trading or Licensing. They're going to go, this is a members issue. You now need to go and deal with this with your members. So they're going to send it straight back to exactly the same forum where it happened. Which is okay. So if it's serious enough, then the management committee would be within their rights to say, all right, and look, this is also the case in where we don't have an answer to an issue. So say there's something else comes up. So moving away from the proxy voting now, something else comes up where the Constitution is silent. Say it's a particular type of dispute or grievance, and the Constitution is silent on that. And because of the gravity of the situation, the management committee doesn't feel confident to make a decision. They say, yeah, we were elected to lead, but we feel that there's a bit more to this, so we don't think that we can make that decision, so we want to escalate it. They could go exactly the same path and go to their region, their state and their national body, and they're going to say, you're affiliated to us, we don't control your incorporation, you need to deal with that. So then they go the same way, fair trading, consumer affairs, licensing, and they say, this is a member issue. So again, it's going to go back to members. So in the first instance...
And let's face it, in the grand scheme of the operations of businesses and not-for-profit organisations, it's reasonable that our government agencies and governing bodies in the world of sport, for instance, say to these organisations, you've got to deal with this stuff internally. And that's why here in Queensland, for instance, we've recently had it mandated that your constitution has to have a grievance procedure in it, and that grievance procedure must provide for mediation.
And you must go through that process before anything can be escalated to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Because that gets ridiculously expensive for everyone. And that's the right thing to do, I believe.
I think it is the right thing.
Yeah. So the escalation process then is back to the members in these cases. So if there are and I thought you were going to say that they don't happen all that often, because they don't. The number of issues that arise that are so hard to deal with that we've got to escalate them, in reality, it's not that many.
It's more common that there's a noisy member or small group of members in an organisation that tries to circumvent the chain of command and go straight, in some cases, to the national body from club level. And sometimes that fire is fueled by the way that national body responds and the personal relationships that exist between people at different levels of a sport, and that can seriously undermine the legitimacy of the process that should have been followed.
And I'm really glad that a lot of our listeners to basket case clubs are people from those associations, because in many cases, it's because when those sorts of matters that are actually member matters, they're decisions that the management committee should have made in the first place. And in a lot of cases, it's just a matter of, I would rather not get in trouble for not making a decision, when really you're getting in trouble for not making a decision, but I'd rather not get into trouble because we don't make a decision and just put all of this on somebody else than risk making the wrong decision. And it's not necessarily for the backlash I cop straight away. It could be for the ongoing fear that I might get sued for this. Again, in reality, unlikely. Can't say it's not going to happen, but it's unlikely. So we really need our management committees to be better equipped to make these decisions, because they've got the power to it. It says it right there. If you need to interpret the Constitution, interpret it. Be transparent about it if you interpret it, though. But if that doesn't work, then it's a matter of escalating it to the members. And very often we've advised people in an AGM, if there's something that you're doing, and it can simply be that they've brought us in to chair the AGM. Now, we can't chair the AGM because we're not a member. So it says if the president is not available or not willing to chair the meeting, the vice president would chair the meeting. If the vice president's unable or unwilling to chair the meeting, then another member will need to chair the meeting. We're not a member, so technically we can't chair the meeting.
Unless if it's a constitution that we've written and we've provided for it to be,
and allowed that to be the case. But if that's the case, and we say, look, we're going to move a motion, and just transparently lay all of that out. We've brought in an expert to help us through this because it's tricky, and it might not be contentious. It just might be, you might need to follow exactly the right tactics because of the order of motions might be sophisticated because of the dependencies, or even the running of an election can be interesting if based on how they were called, and that you might have one person that's nominated for multiple positions. How do you manage that? So they've brought in an expert to do that, to then say, we know that we're not, in here it says that it's got to be one of us that does that. We'd like this person to do it. We want the members to help us interpret it, that we can do that. So they felt that it's bigger than the management committee, so they've put it to the members. That's generally right, and in reality that should be where most of these things end. But
Yes.
again, it's because we're human, and I'm not passing judgment on anyone. It's just because we're human that we say, I don't want to get in trouble and I don't want to risk getting sued or losing my house over this because it's not worth it. And that's not why I got involved, by the way. I got involved because I like playing football, or my kids like playing football, or my kids like playing netball, and I want to be involved in them, in their lives. So when it then gets escalated to the state or national body or even regional associations, if they don't have the knowledge of everything we're talking through now, then they're likely to default to a position to say, well, they are affiliated to us, so we probably should fix this for them. It's something that we shouldn't actually fix for them. We should be in a position, we in this case, are the staff of our state and national peak bodies, to be in a position to provide that level of support back to their clubs and associations to say, this is actually the process that you need to go through. If we're resourced well enough to do so, we'll be at the meeting for you. We'll help you through it. But you, as a management committee, and your members need to be making these decisions. It can't be on us.
And in that vein, it's important always to remember that, at least given our current typically federated structure of sport delivery, these clubs that we're talking about are their own legal entity. And we've even seen in the past, in some instances, where a governing body will mandate that a constitution of one of their affiliated clubs has a clause, something like, if the shit hits the fan at the club, we can come in and essentially act as administrator, which can't happen. That is actually not okay for that to happen. And when we let that particular state body know, they promptly ceased enforcing that inclusion in club constitutions, but some still remain because clubs haven't updated their constitutions. So,
but they're not enforced.
So
why are those clauses even there?
So, but I like that notion that the governing body can provide support and assistance, but really clear instruction, because that's what people need. Especially, and we've talked about this, I know, several times on the podcast, when things go wrong, emotions are running high, people are already feeling pretty uncomfortable. To then have ambiguity and confusion and lack of clarity in a constitution or in supporting documents that might be things like bylaws or complaint handling processes adds to the angst so much more. And for people to just have a clear step-by-step guide that they can fall back on and say, look, I know that you might not want this investigation to happen, or you might not want to be involved in this particular meeting, but this is our process, and I'm sorry it's written in black and white, but this is what we have to do. That takes a lot of the heat out of the situation for those people who are just trying to do the right thing and didn't get involved for this reason.
I often call that the teacher principle. You know, if it's written up on the whiteboard behind me, look, it's I'm not saying this. It's not, me versus you. It's that's the rule. It says it right there. No talking in class. So So
I don't think either of us listened to that particular rule.
No talking in class. No talking in class.
Michael would be a great student if he could just shut up. Oh, no, wait, that was my report cards.
No, mine was every single one needs to improve his handwriting. I'm good at typing. Why do I need to?
I'm a really neat typist.
But I didn't start that until grade 8. You're a neat typist and needs to stop trying to be the class clown. I don't know why they said
I wasn't trying.
It's just natural. All right, let's try and put a bow on this. So if there's something in the Constitution, if there's something missing from the Constitution, then there will typically be somewhere that it says it's up to the management committee to make an interpretation. That interpretation needs to have regard for the Act and if there's a regulation under the Act. If they don't, or if they don't feel that they can, then the escalation process is not to the state body, and it's not it's typically back to the members to help us interpret this. And ideally it's to make an interpretation so that we can get through this situation, but what a great catalyst for then fixing it. That's what's so important.
Absolutely.
It's so often that it just gets then forgotten and we dealt with it, but we didn't actually fix the problem, and so then 3 years later we're back here again.
And therein lies the opportunity for me to beautifully tie this back to where we started this discussion off topic, which was natural disasters. And exactly as you just said, we go through that pain and we come out the other side and we've dealt with the problem and treated the symptom rather than actually going to the cause, which is our constitution, and fixing it and rectifying that ambiguity or lack of clarity in the document so that this doesn't happen next time. This doesn't happen for us again when we're on the committee or for the next committee.
For clarity, constitutions don't cause cyclones.
Although, I mean, it's a pretty interesting
whirlwinds, maybe, but not cyclones.
Yeah.
If then there is one piece of legislation that we do need to at least mention.
Yep.
I'll mention it like this. If you have trouble sleeping, try reading legislation, because it typically will put you to sleep. All of the, especially the older stuff, the legalese. Some of the newer legislation, especially since the turn of the century, has been much easier to understand. But if you go back to some of the legislation from the 60s, it's complicated. So you will fall asleep reading it. There's an act called the Acts Interpretation Act, which is a piece of legislation that tells you how to read legislation. Seriously, that's the one that's going to put you to sleep. So sometimes I have seen reference to that, not necessarily to say you've got to use this act to interpret it, but it comes down to, for instance, one of the ones that comes up a lot is when it says we've got to call a meeting 14 days before the meeting.
What does that actually mean?
Does the day that we call a meeting count as day one, or is day one the next day? So we need to.
And does the date of the meeting count?
And does the date of the meeting count? So what is 14 days? So is it 14, 15 or 16?
Yep.
So let's get
Read the Acts Interpretation Act and you too can A, rectify your insomnia, and B, get the answer to that question.
Or indeed, have clarity in the Constitution.
Even
so again, that's the sort of thing that we look for in redoing constitutions.
Yep.
The only other thing that I wanted to add, and this is now jumping back to the proxy situation, even though the Constitution is wrong, let's now say that the Constitution was wrong. The Constitution's right, but they're behaving incorrectly against the Constitution.
Okay.
So let's say the Constitution says proxies. We do not accept proxies. So then that trumps what's in the regulation, it trumps what's in the Act, it trumps what's in the template Constitution or model rules, yet they've been accepting proxies every year, and it's only that somebody then says we can't accept proxies.
It's been their way of doing things.
So they're still accepting proxies, even though the Constitution says we don't. Now, where this happens is where somebody clever comes in and rewrites the Constitution for clarity.
Yep.
But then they forget it when they get to because that was adopted at the AGM, and there's a whole year before they get back there, and they forgot all of the nuance of the stuff we discussed there. It's not really nuance, is it? We don't do proxies, yet because they've been doing it, they keep doing it. I've seen that a lot. Now, if it was that black and white, I'd say you can't accept proxies this meeting. So just straight away, we don't accept proxies.
Yep.
But if we've got the ambiguous situation where there's no mention of proxies, no displacement of the model rules, the management committee has the right to interpret the Constitution, but they've been doing it still, then in that case, I'd probably say, look, if the status quo is that you're doing it,
and you have been doing it for some time,
have been doing it, there is a level of acceptance that you would do it.
Yep.
Now, if you want to do it, if you don't want to do it, that's at the moment beside the point, because you have been doing it, members expect it. Nobody's pointed out this irregularity, and there's enough ambiguity in here because you'd need to go somewhere else.
And typically it gets pointed out when someone has a bug to bear or a case to win
political platform.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to vote for or against this motion, or I want this motion to fail or succeed, or I want this candidate to be elected or not elected.
Yeah.
So typically a vested interest.
Yep.
In that case, then I'd say do what you've been doing, but again, go back and solve the system. The system needs to, and in this case, the system
and be
is the
transparent and say, look, our Constitution says one thing. We've been accepting proxies. Don't try and sweep this stuff under the carpet.
Yep.
We've been accepting proxies, so that's the way that we've been doing things. Therefore,
okay, I said
we suggest that this is the way that this meeting proceeds. Can we ask the members?
There we go, and that's the next thing.
Yep.
If you really want to cover your bases there as a management committee that doesn't want to be held to account for a decision, you should be held to account for the decision, but you don't want to get in trouble for the decision, then before making the decision, throw it to the members in that case to say, this is what we've been doing. This is the scenario as we've now taken advice and we know that. Which way would you like to go? And then let the members vote.
Yeah.
Do proxies count towards that procedural motion?
It depends.
On that note, it's probably a good chance to wrap up, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
It always is your pleasure.
About these just fascinating things that really... This is called basket case clubs because it's things like this that make discussions turn clubs into basket cases. It's just this turmoil.
Yeah, it is.
I've got a picture of cats fighting in a basket, quite literally. Like, fluff going everywhere. That's what You've seen those AGMs. You've seen those AGMs.
Yeah.
We know those AGMs exist.
They do.
Yeah. So what to do from here? As Steve said, this is what we do day
Yep.
in, day out. So if you've got a constitution that you're not sure about, you don't even have to go looking for this. Just send it to us and we'll do an assessment of your constitution. We'll let you know these sorts of things. So what do we think is missing? Where do we think it's strong? And where do we think it might benefit from a bit of tweaking? And by tweaking, we usually mean, whoa, there's a lot of basket casey stuff in here, kind of needs to go and be replaced.
Right, a new one. Yep.
Or, no, it's fine. Fix this couple of things, these two things here and you're fine.
Yep.
Thanks, of course, to Jess for being our wonderful editor and producer. Steve, look forward to speaking to you again next time.
I'll be here, same time, same place.
See ya.
See ya.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.